Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Tracy Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe wherever you're catching this episode, whether you're watching or just listening. And if you're watching, if you're on Spotify, do all of those things that I just instructed you to do. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. This week, I want to talk about earned wage access, which is a topic I believe I've spoken about on the podcast before. Earned wage access is basically the philosophy and the ability for employees to access their wages as they've earned them ahead of or before, or really at any time ahead of their regularly scheduled payday, I should say. So let's say someone gets paid usually biweekly and they have a week left until that payday, but they really need to access the wages that they've already worked and earned. So let's say it's a Wednesday and they've worked Monday and Tuesday, and they are really interested in accessing those wages. That is essentially what earned wage access is, where then they would, that employee in particular would be able to access, let's say, the 5 hours per day that they had already worked. This is a topic that I wanted to talk about, because it's something that I really believe can improve greatly the lives of hourly employees, especially, but also just employee engagement overall. And it's something that has been definitely more popular in recent years. And one of the reasons why also I wanted to talk about it this week is because recently, I want to say in the last 2 days, I think. Yeah. So this was May, oh no, sorry, a little bit longer than that. Last week, I should say. On May 21st, specifically, South Carolina became the 5th state to enact a law regulating earned wage access providers, but it doesn't subject them to lending laws, which we're going to get into. But because this is a recent, kind of news article that is relevant to those of us in HR, but also those of us who are employees, I thought it would be an interesting topic. Before I get into some of the stuff that I just mentioned, like lending laws and things like that, I just kind of want to reiterate what earned wage access is. It is effectively the opportunity where employers are able to provide employees access to their earned wages. This, again, as I kind of said in the beginning, or just a little while ago, I believe that this is something that hourly employees especially can benefit greatly from. Hourly employees are more often than not working a minimum wage or maybe slightly above. If you think about hourly employees in the perspective of exempt versus non-exempt, there are salary requirements to be exempt. So let's just say non-exempt employees, therefore those who are earning an income on an hourly basis. While there may be people who are well above the minimum wage, based on their salaries, it's highly possible that they also are working paycheck to paycheck in order to make ends meet, and or working a second job or even a third job. A term that I recently learned about is this term overemployed. And I've learned this term because technically I'm overemployed because I have my podcast and my own business while also working full time for a tech company, and actually a tech company that provides earned wage access to employees that use our product. So, it's this idea of overemployed. We can come back to that as a separate podcast episode probably. But anyway, I don't want to digress too much. Earned wage access is really, to me, again, super beneficial for those who are working on an hourly basis. When we think about the common issues that hourly employees are faced with, it tends to be income driven issues, whether we're talking about the amount that they earn. And when we think about minimum wage and things like that, that's one element there. And then the second is that because of their salary, or I should say their hourly income, it is highly possible, as I mentioned, that they are interested or potentially part of generating other income streams for themselves. In my experience, having worked in retail, let's take Target as an example, where roughly 80% of store employees are hourly. I'll speak from my own experience. I found that those employees more often than not were working second or third jobs. And again, were quote unquote overemployed. And these individuals were always looking for more hours in order to gain a higher income or earn a higher income. And I can only imagine, I don't know what Target does today. It's been a while since I worked there, but I can only imagine what would be if those employees had access to their earned wages ahead of paid periods, ahead of pay dates. And while I remember Target did do advances for employees, it wasn't, it's not the same as what I believe earned wage access is. So when we kind of break this down a little bit further, earned wage access, when we think about what it means for an employee, not necessarily what it is, but what it means for an employee, it means that that employee then potentially doesn't necessarily need to work a second job. If they can get more hours at their existing job and have access to more hours, potentially be able to receive the money that they've already earned ahead of time, they're not in this position where they're necessarily, I should say, where they're actively looking for pay when they need it. Now, of course, if a business is not able to give an employee more hours, then they are still kind of in that same position. But earned wage access does provide that flexibility for employees, for people, for human beings who need flexibility in their pay. Now, with that background, I do want to read you a little bit from this article from HR Dive, which goes into this new law in South Carolina. So again, a new law was signed in on May 21st, requiring earned wage access providers operating in the state to register annually with the Department of Consumer Affairs. And as part of the registration, the state will require the earned wage access, or EWA, providers list fees to be imposed on the employee or employer in providing the services, and include at least one option by which a user can receive earned wage access services at no cost. Now, one of the things that I want to continue with here is this idea of a loan being provided, or I should say lending laws, as part of the laws, because sometimes when earned wage access is part of the conversation, people automatically kind of jump to, well, is this a loan? Is this an advance that is then either paid back, or what does that look like? How does that work? So the article continues, while the new law imposes other limitations on such providers, the big win for the industry is that the law specifically says EWA, again, earned wage access services, won't be considered loans and their providers won't be treated like lenders, which for me, and I'll go into some of the logistics behind this too, but for me, I think this is a really important part of the law. Earned wage access to me is not a loan lender relationship, because effectively an employee who is participating in an earned wage access program or has access to earned wage access, they have already earned the hours that they're quote unquote cashing in on. So to me, that doesn't feel like a loan. Obviously, when you compare it to something like a 401k and you take out from a 401k, you can make the same argument. Well, I made those contributions, and so taking it out is a loan. But it's different because earned wage access is specifically on income, whereas if you look at something like a 401k or another, maybe I should say specifically with a 401k loan or a different type of loan, it's not income driven. Those are either based on specific personal or company contributions or state provided benefits in depending on, or I should say bank provided benefits depending on the type of loan. You could also look at like the federal government loans for student loans. It's different, right? Like to me, and I'm not an expert in finance, but to me, the relationship is different because if we again take a different example with a federal student loan, you've not necessarily yet earned your degree, and yet you're receiving loans from the federal government in order to do so, in order to be able to pay for the services that you're rendering, which is essentially the education you receive. And then when either as you complete your degree or when you finish your degree, you then owe money to the loan provider, to the lender, in this case, in my example, the federal government. So with earned wage access, to me, the relationship is different because an employee is in an employee-employer relationship with the employer providing earned wage access, and the employee has already worked the hours. They've already provided the service that they are contracted, or obviously not contracted in at-will states, but that they are hired to provide. That service has been provided, right? So essentially, the way I see it is almost as a payment. And so when we think about earned wage access relative to pay dates and regularly scheduled pay dates, I see it as, well, if an employee is typically paid on this Friday and they are looking to access their wages the Wednesday prior, it's not a loan, it's them effectively advancing their paycheck, and there shouldn't be any penalty or fee or anything like that because they've already earned those wages. Now, of course, there are companies that provide earned wage access opportunities who do charge a fee, but to me, that fee should be incurred by the employer because, again, as I said in the beginning, I believe this drives employee engagement. When an hourly employee who's earning $16 an hour works 25 hours a week and they have a leak in their home and they need to pay for a repair person to come out and fix it that day, but they are working paycheck to paycheck and they don't have the means until payday, their employer is driving for them a very serious level of engagement because that employee now can take out wages that they've already earned and be able to pay for a repair person to fix their leak, again with this example, rather than having to wait. So the type of engagement that it drives is pretty personal. This is not, you know, liking the environment that we work in, and that's where the engagement comes from. This is like a deeply personal level of engagement. So and maybe it's hard for some of us to relate to some of these examples because maybe we've never had to live in this type of experience, or we haven't had these experiences, or we don't know someone with these experiences. But I can tell you from my own personal experience that it really makes a huge difference when someone has total flexibility in how they live and the money that they earn and the way that they can have flexibility just around accessing their money that they've earned. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, in my opinion, and from what I've seen, again, from my own experience, especially in retail, when employees have access to their wages ahead of or in part with their regularly scheduled pay dates, they are much more interested in working the shifts that they're scheduled. And it's not to say that people who are working on an hourly basis aren't interested in working their shifts. That's not what I'm saying. What I mean is that very specifically it reduces attendance issues because they can see physically how much money they could be earning for that shift. And I can tell you, at least with the company that I work for, Legion Technologies, we provide our clients earned wage access, and you can literally see how much your shift is going to earn you. And when, I think for some of you who have been here for a while, you know that I was actually when I was still in retail, we used the technology that Legion Technologies offers. So I was technically a client before I was an employee. So it's an interesting story for another time. If you haven't listened to that episode, I think from probably 2.5 years ago at this point. But anyway, what I saw in my experience is that effectively, employees are really less likely to skip out on their shifts because they see how it's going to impact them. If someone's going to earn or has the ability to earn $200 for their shift, there's an opportunity cost there if they call out or if they're late. They see the actual monetary impact by attending or by not attending their shift. And so on in the same breath, when someone sees a shift that is then available for them when a company offers earned wage access, they are likely to work more or they're likely to take on more shifts, which only benefits them more greatly if they are an individual who is actively seeking a higher income level, or an increased access to wage, or I should say, an increased access to income. So, again, this kind of comes back to this idea around hourly employees who are more often than not working more than one job in order to make ends meet. When you have this perfect storm where it's earned wage access, shift flexibility, and the ability for hourly employees, especially, to take shifts from others or swap shifts and things like that. And I could talk about that for a whole other episode too, because it's another thing that I think is really, really helpful for the hourly population. And you then also have, an employer that sees these things as driving engagement. It is the perfect storm for allowing, I realize storm sounds kind of negative, but I mean it in a positive way, that then you have this experience where employees are really experiencing a type of flexibility that enables them not only at work but also in their personal lives. And flexibility, it's a term that I've used especially for myself as a salaried employee, as a person who works remotely, obviously as a new mom. Flexibility is really important to me. Hourly employees make up over 60% of the US working population. So if we're only thinking of 40%, meaning the salaried employees, when it comes to flexibility, then we're missing the majority. We're missing what their needs are. And flexibility is not something that is just in the context of remote work versus hybrid work versus in-person work. Flexibility is so much more than that. And so to me, earned wage access is one of the pillars of flexibility, especially for hourly employees, because it's income based. And when people have flexibility with their income and they have a say so over their earned wages, to me, the sky is the limit for the opportunities that they feel that they have with a business. Again, the engagement is huge there, I think, because a company that offers earned wage access versus a company that doesn't, to me, I think there's a huge recruitment factor there. And employees are just generally happier when they feel more in control of their finances and of their income. And certainly there's, I'm sure that there's an argument to be made saying, oh, well, and I know sometimes people say this in the same breath, oh, well, earned wage access isn't driving a financially sound experience for employees, but that's not true. Because so let's say even more specifically, if people think that it's counterintuitive to or contradictory to saving, it's just simply not true. Because let's take an hourly employee who earns $16 an hour and they work 25 hours a week. Whether you have earned wage access or not, saving might not be the first thing that they're able to do. So, businesses have to really think about what is their audience, who is their audience, and what is it that their audience really needs. Someone who's earning, let's do the math. So someone who is earning $16 an hour and works 25 hours a week, that's $400 a week before any taxes and deductions. So times 52, that's $20,800 a year. Depending on where they live, that is, in general, this is below the poverty line, because I think the poverty line is in the 40s in the United States. At least it is, I think, in New York. So depending on where they live and what their cost of living is, this is potentially not really a livable wage. So when a company says, oh, well, earned wage access doesn't promote saving, or it's counterintuitive to saving, it's just not a realistic part of the conversation. If you as a business want your employees to save more, that's separate, because then it pulls into the conversation. What are people earning? Do you have a 401k match program? Do you have 401k for people who are working part-time? Because someone working 25 hours a week is more often than not part-time. And do you have financial literacy programs? That's what promotes saving. Earned wage access promotes flexibility and engagement. So there are two totally separate things. And it's not to say that someone who has access to earned wage access products or services isn't doing that in order to save, but most likely that person is someone that needs to access their wages when they need them because of expenses, not necessarily because of investment or saving. So, to me as an employer, or I should say as an HR person for an employer that values earned wage access, I think it's really interesting to hear the opposite argument around saving or this being a loan. Like, it's just, that's a mindset thing to me. We have to change our mindsets. We have to really think who is the audience and what do they need? What are they benefiting from when we institute or don't institute these perks, right? Or it's not even a perk, actually. It's really just kind of, I don't know, I guess we could say benefit, because just like health benefits aren't necessarily a perk, they are a benefit of working for a particular company. So let's call it a benefit. Because when we talk about a perk, it's almost like saying, oh, well, you get, X number of dollars for lunch reimbursements. But that's not what this is. This is saying, hey, employee X, you have access to the hours that you've already worked, because we understand that flexibility is really important to you and your bills might not fall in the timeline that we pay you on. So, change the mindset a little bit. Anyway, I kind of just want to wrap by sharing a little bit more on this law. So the article does talk about here that earned wage access is increasingly being offered to employees as a means to tap their earned wages before a regularly scheduled payday. And the article continues by saying that in contrast to the South Carolina law, California and Connecticut have taken a different track, moving to subject EWA payments to lending laws that have provisions for policing interest rates and dictating transparency. I feel really strongly against imposing interest rates on earned wage access opportunities, because, again, these are earned wages. To me, it's like, I guess I question, what is the difference between an employee taking out money from their bank account, right? Let's say on a Friday when their paycheck is dispersed to them, versus a day, a week, a few days before, when they've already earned those wages. Again, it's not access to wages before they've been worked or before they've been earned. It's like this employee who works for $16 an hour, works 25 hours a week. They've already worked 20 hours. Why should they not be able to access those 20 hours? Why is that a loan? They're expected to receive that payment on their next regularly scheduled payday. Why would there be interest on that? And ultimately, I also think it's a company's decision. As much as regulation helps and supports not only us in HR, but also it provides employees greater safety nets. And it does, regulation certainly keeps employers in check, so to speak. There is such a thing as over-regulation. Like, why? I really am curious as to why earned wage, again, it's in the title, earned wage access, would be considered a lending and borrower relationship. It just doesn't make sense to me. Anyway, that is my take on earned wage access. I'm going to link in the show notes the article that I referenced from HR Dive, so you can take a look. And if this is a topic that you really enjoyed and you want to hear more about, let me know. You can message me on Instagram. You can write me an email at contact@hrtracy.com. You could also reach out to me on LinkedIn. I check my messages, but I have a lot of people to get back to. So maternity leave is still kind of catching up to me. So if you're one of the people that has messaged me and I have not gotten back to you yet, don't worry, I will. I apologize for the delay, but thank you for your patience. Anyway, thank you so much for hearing me rant about earned wage access, and hopefully it's opened your eyes to the possibilities of earned wage access, and maybe this is something that you as an employer or as a representative of an employer will maybe offer one day to your employees, hourly or otherwise. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. I'm sure we'll see you back here next week. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're catching this episode, and connect with me on Instagram. Head to my website, sign up for my newsletter, hrtracy.com. There are so many ways to stay connected. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great week. Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.